Premieres and velvet ropes, flashbulbs exploding, the promise of gold. Yet 1972 was the year Hollywood learned a brutal lesson. Star power and massive budgets don't guarantee triumph. That year, some of the industry's most expensive bets came crashing down. Their careers bruised, their studios panicking behind closed doors. What if I told you that box office disaster was as much the rule as the exception in '72? This list reveals 11 films that didn't just underperform. They became cautionary tales, buried in the vault, or whispered about in boardrooms for years. Let's open those curtain calls and see what went catastrophically wrong. Number 1. Shaft's Big Score, 1972. MGM came to Richard Roundtree's breakout sequel, riding the wave of 1971's surprise smash. Roundtree had become a household name, as the first film saved MGM from near bankruptcy. Studio heads assumed lightning could strike twice. They greenlit a hastier production, a bigger budget, the same urban sensibility, but the original's raw authenticity, its Harlem-rooted, location-shot grittiness, couldn't be manufactured. Roundtree was now bankable, and bankability, they believed, was enough. It wasn't. Critics called the sequel bloated, a cynical cash grab trading on the original's coattails. The novelty of blaxploitation had worn thin for general audiences. Shaft's Big Score opened in summer 1972 to modest returns and fell fast. Industry reports suggested it underperformed by 40% against first film projections. Word of mouth collapsed within weeks. MGM, drunk on franchise potential, hadn't reckoned with audience fatigue. The studio lost millions in expected profits. Not yet the film's failure also marked the beginning of the end for blaxploitation's golden moment. Sequels, they were learning, couldn't replicate lightning, and desperation always shows on screen. And then the industry looked westward. Number 2. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. Universal and director Robert Aldrich brought a prestige western to summer multiplexes. Burt Lancaster, an Oscar winner, a true star, led the ensemble. Aldrich, renowned for his action pedigree, seemed like a safe bet. The script tackled Apache uprising and frontier violence with unflinching realism. Test audiences praised it as art, but Universal miscalculated the market. In 1972, the Western genre was already gasping. Young audiences, fractured by Vietnam and social upheaval, had lost interest in cavalry and Indian tales. Even respectable ones. Lancaster's star power couldn't compensate for a genre in decline. Release timing compounded the disaster. Universal dumped it into July alongside younger skewing blockbusters. Ulzana's Raid made $8 million on a reported $6 million budget. A narrow margin that looked better than it was once marketing costs were factored in. But negative word of mouth poisoned its theatrical legs. It vanished from theaters within weeks, a critical orphan and commercial misfire. The Western, Hollywood assumed, was dead. Aldrich's film became the tombstone. Years later, critics would resurrect it as a sophisticated allegory. By then, it was too late to save the genre or the studio's confidence in anything untested. Yet studios kept swinging. Number 3. Pink Flamingos, 1972. John Waters' transgressive cult provocation was distributed by New Line Cinema on a shoestring budget. Waters had no studio backing, no stars, no conventional marketing machinery. The film announced itself as obscene, shocking, deliberately unwatchable to mainstream audiences. And that was the pitch. New Line gambled that underground buzz and art house devotion could sustain limited runs. Instead, Pink Flamingos became an accidental phenomenon, but not before nearly bankrupting its distributor. Production costs were minimal, but distribution, prints, and the legal battles that followed ate profit margins to nothing. Mainstream theaters rejected it outright. Censorship boards in multiple states sought to ban the picture. Word of mouth was seismic but polarizing. People didn't just dislike it, or they were scandalized. Pink Flamingos never went wide. It played midnight screenings and backroom cinemas, a film existing outside the industrial system. New Line survived on sheer audacity and Waters' cult magnetism, but the picture itself was a financial black hole. The real lesson? Provocation doesn't always translate to profitability. Waters understood that. The industry didn't. Pink flamingos became legendary, but only in retrospect. After decades of reevaluation and midnight movie mythology making transformed a near-fatal experiment into underground gospel. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Hollywood's machinery, number 4, The Getaway, 1972. Steve Reeves directed this crime caper with Steve McQueen at the height of his star power. McQueen was box office dynamite in 1972, fresh off The Great Escape and Bullet. When the script was tight, the action visceral, the cast supporting talent was solid. McQueen's agent negotiated a percentage deal. The star was confident, but The Getaway arrived at a saturated moment. Summer 1972 saw a glut of crime thrillers and heist pictures. Audiences had options. Critics, surprisingly lukewarm, called the film workmanlike and cynical. McQueen's charisma was undeniable, but not enough to overcome middling word of mouth. The Getaway made $46 million domestically, respectable but disappointing against inflated expectations. McQueen's take, however, proved significant. The film underperformed at the international box office, a red flag for future McQueen vehicles. Studios would now demand he prove bankability in global markets. The Getaway wasn't a catastrophe, but it was a warning. The star power alone no longer guaranteed triumph. McQueen would spend years fighting to prove he was still viable. The film's lukewarm performance followed his career like a scar, a reminder that even legends have expiration dates. Number 5. Pocket Money, 1972. First Artists Productions, an independent studio founded by Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, and Barbra Streisand, bet heavily on Newman's star power, combined with character actor Lee Marvin in a meandering contemporary western. Terrence Malick had written the screenplay, prestigious pedigree all around. Newman controlled the final edit. The studio believed this pairing of icons, plus Malick's literary sensibility, would resonate with audiences tired of traditional westerns. Instead, Pocket Money arrived in early 1972, to indifference. The film's languid pace, lack of conventional plot momentum, and muddled tone confounded audiences expecting either adventure or comedy. Critics were mixed to hostile. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars. Gene Siskel awarded 0, decalling the leads' performances completely self-indulgent. Newman and Marvin later disputed who had sabotaged the edit in post-production. Marvin claimed Newman finessed his part down. Newman denied it, but admitted the picture didn't really know where it was going. The film limped to commercial failure. National General Pictures barely recouped prints and advertising. First Artists, launched with such optimism, had crashed on its inaugural release. Newman's editorial control became a liability, not an asset. The studio survived, barely. But Pocket Money's failure became Hollywood legend, proof that 2 bankable stars and a literary screenwriter couldn't manufacture chemistry. Sometimes genius needs direction, not just stars and silence. Number 6. Man of La Mancha, 1972. Universal adapts Dale Wasserman's beloved Broadway musical, featuring Peter O'Toole as Don Quixote. The stage play had grossed millions. O'Toole was an Oscar-nominated star. Director Arthur Hiller had scored with Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. Theater musicals were dominating box offices. Cabaret, Chicago, Godspell. Surely Man of La Mancha couldn't fail. It could, and did. The film's adaptation was ponderous, overstuffed, and self-conscious. O'Toole's mannered performance alienated audiences expecting charm. The production design felt studio-bound and artificial. Critics called it bloated nostalgia masquerading as epic. The musical numbers, celebrated on stage, felt flat and dated on screen. Universal had budgeted the film at $12 million, expensive for its time. It made barely half that domestically. International returns were negligible. The studio took a severe bath. Man of La Mancha became the film that killed the Broadway-to-screen musical boom. Studios grew cautious about adapting stage plays. O'Toole's career suffered lasting damage. Audiences now associated him with commercial failure. The picture lingers as a symbol of how Broadway success doesn't translate to cinema. What works on a stage for 2 hours crumbles under the harsh scrutiny of film's close-up. Man of La Mancha proved that lesson in the most expensive way possible. Number 7. The Poseidon Adventure, 1972. Wait, before you interrupt. Yes, The Poseidon Adventure was a massive hit, but its sequel in 1979 became a cautionary tale that actually began here, in its bloated success. The original cost $5 million and made $90 million, but the Poseidon Adventure's success proved dangerously seductive. It spawned countless imitators, each with bigger budgets and diminishing returns. Other disaster films released in 1972 tried replicating its magic and failed. Earthquake, Skyjacked, and a dozen other pictures all traded on the same template: ensemble cast, catastrophe, survive or die. Some succeeded. Most didn't. The real disaster wasn't any single film, but the genre oversaturation that Poseidon Adventure inspired. Studios, panicking to replicate its windfall, greenlit scripts that had no business being made. Budgets bloated. Quality control evaporated. By 1975, audiences were exhausted. The disaster film gold rush became a burial ground. Number 8. Snoopy, Come Home, 1972. A beloved comic strip transitioning to animated cinema should be foolproof. Instead, National General Pictures' Snoopy, Come Home, arrived at a fractured moment for animated films. Disney was dormant. Their animation department was struggling. Independent animation was gaining ground. The film, charming but conventional, had no theatrical momentum. Target audiences, children and parents, had drifted toward live-action films or television specials. Theatrical animated films were becoming dinosaurs. Snoopy, Come Home was beautifully crafted but released into a market that had already moved on. The picture was profitable but underperformed against production costs. It played theaters for minimal runs before vanishing to television syndication, where it found a second life. The lesson was brutal. Even beloved IP can't overcome a saturated marketplace. Animation studios learned that theatrical animation required either revolutionary technique or massive marketing infrastructure. Charlie Brown and Peanuts had become a television phenomenon. The big screen felt like a step backward, not forward. Snoopy Come Home didn't recover its theatrical moment. It became a creature of cable television. Profitable, yes, but creatively ghosted by the industry that initially rejected it. Number 9. Skyjacked, 1972. MGM's hijacking thriller featured Charlton Heston commanding a flight threatened by terrorists. The plot was topical. Airline hijackings were epidemic in the early 70s. Heston was a box office institution. The picture was tense, professional, well-crafted, and it bombed anyway. Why? Because the audience for aircraft disaster procedurals was far smaller than MGM anticipated. Skyjacked faced brutal competition from Poseidon Adventure and other spectacle-driven films. It was also released in August, late summer, when moviegoers were burned out. MGM's marketing campaign misfired. Ads positioned it as action-adventure when it was actually a taut, slow-burn thriller. Audiences expecting explosions got talking and negotiation. Word of mouth was mixed. Critics praised it for restraint. Audiences found it tedious. Skyjacked made $23 million on a $5 million budget. Respectable on paper, but the studio's expectations were higher. They'd budgeted for an event film. Instead, they got a solid B picture that played its niche and vanished. The film's failure taught studios that topicality alone doesn't guarantee box office. Relevance without spectacle is an orphan at the multiplexes. Number 10. Liquid Sky, 1972. An ultra-low-budget experimental film shot on Soviet stock and distributed through underground networks, Liquid Sky had no chance of mainstream penetration. Director Slava Zuckerman crafted a surreal vision of alien invasion and drug culture in Manhattan. The film was deliberately obscure, visually stunning, but narratively opaque. It played college theaters and underground cinemas, rarely reaching mainstream multiplexes. Liquid Sky's budget was negligible, under $100,000, but its absence from general distribution meant it earned almost nothing theatrically. The film became a legend only after underground video distribution made it accessible. So what failed at the box office became a cult treasure through home video and eventually streaming. Liquid Sky is a perfect example of how the theatrical box office system fails to account for niche audiences and alternative distribution. The film thrived everywhere, except the place it was intended to be shown. Its theatrical failure is actually irrelevant to its cultural triumph. A ghost in the machine of Hollywood economics. Number 11. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, 1970. Re-released, 1972. Roger Corman's exploitation masterpiece, originally released in 1970 as a softcore musical melodrama, was re-released theatrically in 1972 as part of a double feature strategy. The film, audacious, erotic, deliberately trashy, had cult appeal, but its re-release was commercially stillborn. By 1972, the audiences had moved past the vibe of early 70s exploitation. The picture's explicit sexuality now felt dated, rather than transgressive. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls made money through drive-in circuits and back-channel bookings, but its theatrical re-release was a gamble that didn't pay off. For Corman, failure was irrelevant. The film's cost was minimal, but the studio's attempt to franchise exploitation cinema through aggressive re-releases showed desperation. The picture ultimately became legendary through home video, proof that commercial failure and cultural legacy operate on different timelines entirely. 1972 revealed the cracks in Hollywood's edifice. The studio system, fractured by changing tastes and demographic upheaval, could no longer guarantee that money equals box office. And myth-making required precision timing and genuine inspiration, not just capital. Commercial failure doesn't erase cultural value, just as box office triumph doesn't guarantee legacy. The industry learned, slowly, that audiences had evolved, but the lesson cost them millions. Some studios never recovered their footing, yet from this wreckage emerged a new era. Filmmakers willing to take risks, audiences demanding authenticity over spectacle, distribution networks adapting to chaos. Disaster, in the end, is just the prelude to reinvention. The lights came up on a different Hollywood. Smaller, smarter, and far more dangerous.